The aroma of lighter fluid and oversweet barbecue sauce hung heavy in the humid July air, a scent I usually associated with a reluctant, almost obligatory sense of family togetherness. Today, however, it was an olfactory prelude to my annual public flaying. It was the Johnson family's annual summer barbecue, a sprawling, boisterous affair hosted, as always, at my parents' immaculately landscaped and conspicuously oversized suburban home. And, as an extra layer of personal torture, it was also my 32nd birthday. I stood near the slightly wilting coleslaw, a forced, polite smile plastered on my face, trying to make small talk with my Aunt Carol about her prize-winning petunias, while simultaneously keeping a watchful eye on my two young children, Lily, 8, and Tom, 6, who were dangerously close to upending a large bowl of potato salad. My husband, David, was predictably running late, a critical, last-minute work commitment. Something about a crucial design flaw in a new sustainable urban development project his firm was spearheading in Copenhagen had kept him in the city. He'd promised to get here as soon as humanly possible. But as soon as possible, in David's world of architectural emergencies and transatlantic conference calls, could mean anything. The guest list, as usual, was a motley crew of about 30 or 40 souls, a smattering of increasingly distant extended family, a cohort of my parents' old, golf-playing family friends, and a few carefully selected, status-enhancing neighbors. And then there was my older brother, Mark. Mark, a man whose personality seemed to have peaked somewhere around his senior year as high school quarterback. A boorish, arrogant, and deeply insecure individual who now sold mid-range insurance policies with a distinct lack of discernible enthusiasm. Mark, who, for as long as I could remember, had a cherished family tradition of delivering a hilarious birthday roast for any unfortunate family member whose special day happened to coincide with one of these gatherings. Today, lucky me, it was my turn in the proverbial barrel. As if on cue, my father, Robert Johnson, a mid-level executive whose life seemed dedicated to the relentless pursuit of middle management status and the approval of men slightly richer than himself, clinked his beer bottle loudly against a nearby citronella candle. All right. Settle down, everyone," he boomed, his voice a little too loud, a little too hearty. "Our very own Marky has a few words he'd like to say in honor of our birthday girl, Emma." A smattering of polite, if somewhat apprehensive, applause rippled through the backyard. Mark, never one to shy away from an audience, swaggered to the center of the patio, a smug, self-satisfied smirk already plastered on his face. My mother, Susan, a woman whose social anxieties were matched only by her relentless desire for community approval, beamed at him with an almost beatific adoration. His wife, Karen, a woman as status-obsessed and superficially charming as my mother, and arguably even more venomous, giggled encouragingly, her eyes already sparkling with a malicious anticipation. Mark's roast started, as it always did, with a few deceptively gentle, almost affectionate jabs. My questionable fashion sense as a teenager, my brief, ill-advised goth phase in college, but then, as always, it quickly, inevitably, devolved into something far more personal, far more cruel. He launched into a scathing, detailed, and largely fabricated monologue about my career choices. I was a freelance writer and illustrator, specializing in children's books and educational materials. A profession my family had always, loudly and frequently, deemed impractical. A childish fantasy. Not a real job. He mocked my bohemian lifestyle. I lived in a small, charming, slightly ramshackle rented cottage in a less fashionable part of town, a far cry from his own sterile, new-build McMansion. He made subtle, but deeply cutting, digs about my parenting skills, implying I was too lenient, too artsy-fartsy with Lily and Tom. He even, with a particularly nasty flourish, managed to work in a few hilarious observations about my post-baby weight and my interesting new haircut. And my parents, Robert and Susan Johnson, laughed. They laughed uproariously, their heads thrown back, tears of mirth streaming down their faces, actively encouraging him with delighted nods and appreciative guffaws. Karen, naturally, shrieked with laughter. Her own contributions to my public humiliation usually reserved for more private, behind-the-back snipings. Some of the other guests, I noted with a familiar, sinking feeling, looked increasingly uncomfortable, their smiles strained, their gazes flicking away, offering me weak, pitying glances that were almost worse than the outright ridicule. I sat there, on a flimsy plastic lawn chair, that forced, painful smile still plastered on my face, my cheeks burning with a hot, itchy shame, my heart sinking into a cold, dark pit of despair. This wasn't harmless family fun. This was a ritualistic public character assassination, a systematic campaign of humiliation I had endured, in various insidious forms, for my entire adult life. My children, Lily and Tom, who had initially been excited about the funny speech, now looked confused, worried, their small faces reflecting my own internal distress. Lily sidled up to me, her small hand creeping into mine, her eyes wide with a dawning, unhappy comprehension. I felt utterly, completely alone, exposed, a public laughingstock, a jester in my own family's cruel, uncaring court. And then, just as Mark was delivering a particularly vicious and entirely unfunny punchline about my failed artistic dreams and my inevitable future as a starving artist living in a garret. A sleek, unfamiliar, at least to most of the assembled guests, and undeniably expensive-looking dark gray sedan pulled quietly, almost silently, into the long, sweeping driveway. Growing up as Emma Johnson had been a masterclass in feeling less than, I was, from an early age, the sensitive one, the artistic one, the different one, in a family that valued, above all else, conventional success, unquestioning conformity, and the meticulous maintenance of outward appearances. Mark, my older brother, the firstborn son, had always been the golden child. His every minor, often entirely unremarkable, achievement celebrated with an almost hysterical fervor. His many, often glaring flaws and failings consistently, conveniently, overlooked or excused. My parents, Robert and Susan, had never truly understood, or even attempted to support, my quiet, creative ambitions. They had constantly, relentlessly, compared me unfavorably to Mark, subtly, and sometimes not so subtly at all, undermining my confidence, my self-esteem, my very sense of worth. Why can't you just be more like your brother? Emma? My mother would sigh, her voice laced with a weary disappointment. He's so sensible, so focused on a real career. When are you going to give up this silly writing nonsense and get a proper job? Emma? My father would demand, his tone brusque, impatient. You need a pension plan, a 401k, not a drawer full of rejection slips. Mark's wife, Karen, a woman whose social ambition and superficial charm mirrored my mother's almost perfectly, had, upon marrying into the Johnson clan, quickly, eagerly, joined in the long-standing family tradition of belittling and dismissing me. She saw me, I think, as an easy target, a convenient foil for her own perceived sophistication and success, a way to solidify her own precarious position within the complex, often brutal, Johnson family hierarchy. This public roasting, this ritual humiliation, wasn't a new phenomenon. It was a recurring decimal in the painful equation of my family life. Family gatherings, especially birthdays and holidays, often involved Mark teasing me, his jokes always possessing a sharp, cruel, demeaning edge, always delivered with a smug, self-satisfied smirk, and always met with gales of appreciative laughter and enthusiastic encouragement from my parents and from Karen. I had, over the years, learned to endure it, to develop a thick skin, to shrink myself, to make myself small, almost invisible, to avoid making waves, to try and deflect their casual cruelty with a forced, brittle smile. My husband, David, had witnessed this dynamic a few times in the early years of our relationship and had, in his quiet, understated way, expressed his profound disapproval to me in private. But he rarely attended these large, boisterous, and invariably emotionally fraught Johnson family gatherings due to his genuinely demanding international work schedule, a fact my family often and loudly resented, interpreting his absences as snobbery, as a deliberate slight. David. My David. He was the quiet strength in my often tumultuous life, the calm, steady anchor in my storm-tossed sea. We had met in college, a slow-burn, unexpected romance built not on grand, dramatic gestures, but on a deep, mutual respect, a shared intellectual curiosity, a quiet, almost telepathic understanding. David, while now incredibly, almost intimidatingly, successful in his chosen field, he had, with two equally brilliant, equally unassuming partners, founded a small, innovative, and now internationally renowned architectural firm specializing in cutting-edge sustainable urban design, was the least pretentious, most genuinely humble man I had ever known. He rarely spoke of his achievements, never flaunted his considerable and growing wealth. The Johnsons, my family, had always been vaguely, if politely, dismissive of David. They saw him as too quiet, a bit standoffish, not nearly ambitious enough, simply because he didn't constantly boast about his accomplishments or engage in their tiresome games of one-upmanship. They perceived him as a bit of an oddball, not really their sort. They had absolutely no real idea of the true extent of his professional success, his international reputation, or his significant financial standing, as David was an intensely private man, and I, frankly, had never felt the slightest inclination or need to broadcast his achievements to my chronically unimpressed, invariably critical family. They probably, I suspected, still assumed he was just another struggling creative, much like they perceived me to be a slightly more successful, perhaps, but ultimately equally insignificant version of their disappointing daughter. But David was my rock, my staunchest supporter, the one person in the entire world who truly saw me, who valued my talent, my intelligence, my quirky, often unconventional, spirit. He loathed, with a quiet, visceral intensity, the way my family treated me, the casual cruelty, the relentless undermining, but he had also, always, respected my own complex, often conflicted, desire to try and maintain some semblance of a relationship with them, however dysfunctional, however painful it might be. I had dreaded this particular barbecue for weeks, especially knowing it was my birthday, and that Mark, therefore, would be in prime, unmerciful roasting form. I'd almost begged off, feigning a sudden, debilitating illness. But my mother, Susan, had laid on a guilt trip of truly epic, almost operatic proportions. "Emma, darling, it's your birthday. Your special day. All your family will be here, just for you. You can't possibly disappoint us all like that. Don't be so terribly selfish." David's unavoidable, last-minute work commitment, a crucial presentation to a consortium of European city planners in Zurich, had only amplified my anxiety, my sense of impending doom, facing my family alone, especially on my birthday. A day supposedly dedicated to celebrating my existence felt like voluntarily walking into a den of particularly sarcastic, emotionally stunted lions, armed with nothing but a polite, increasingly fragile smile and a rapidly diminishing sense of self-worth. And the presence of my children, Lily and Tom, made it all infinitely worse. They were old enough now, perceptive enough to understand, at least on some level, that their mother was being publicly ridiculed, that the laughter directed at me was not kind, not joyful. Their confused, worried little faces during Mark's increasingly vicious roast were like tiny, sharp daggers to my already bruised heart. And then, the sleek, dark gray Audi A8, a car I didn't recognize. A car that was certainly not in my parents' or Mark's usual repertoire of sensible, mid-range SUVs, had pulled quietly, almost silently, into the driveway. Out stepped David. My David. He looked tired. Yes, his usually immaculate suit slightly rumpled from the long flight. But his presence, even in his travel-weary state, was immediately, almost palpably, commanding. There was a quiet, understated gravitas about him, a calm, focused intensity that seemed to instantly cut through Mark's braying, obnoxious laughter, silencing him mid-insult. Mark faltered, his smug, cruel joke dying on his lips, his face registering a flicker of surprise, then annoyance, at the unexpected interruption. My parents, Robert and Susan, and my sister-in-law. Karen looked momentarily disconcerted. Their appreciative amusement abruptly curtailed. The other guests, visibly relieved by the sudden, welcome distraction, turned their attention towards the newcomer, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and a dawning, hopeful anticipation. David didn't say anything immediately. He didn't need to. He just stood there, for a long, silent moment, his gaze sweeping slowly, deliberately, over the assembled scene. My flushed, humiliated face, the unshed tears glistening in my eyes, my children's small and distressed faces pressed against my legs, Mark's still smug, but now slightly uncertain, cruel expression, my parents' and Karen's oblivious, almost idiotic, lingering amusement. His own expression, when his eyes finally met mine, was unreadable, a dangerous, almost unnerving calm. He walked directly, purposefully, towards me, ignoring everyone else in the backyard. His eyes, a warm, steady, reassuring blue, fixed only on mine. He gently, tenderly, took my trembling hand in his touch warm, firm, incredibly reassuring. "Happy birthday, my love," he said, his voice low, clear, yet somehow carrying easily in the sudden, almost preternatural hush that had fallen over the patio. "I am so incredibly sorry I'm late. The final negotiations on that Zurich urban development deal took considerably longer than anyone anticipated." Zurich? Deal? Negotiations? This was all new, and I suspected entirely bewildering information for the assembled Johnson clan, who probably still thought David spent his days designing slightly more upscale garden sheds. My father, Robert, ever the self-important, oblivious patriarch, recovering his usual bluster, approached David, his hand outstretched in a hearty, if somewhat forced, greeting. Well, David, my boy," he boomed, his voice a little too loud, a little too jovial. "Finally decided to grace us all with your August presence, eh? Missed most of the fun, I'm afraid. Our Marky was just in the middle of giving us his annual, and I must say, particularly hilarious, birthday tribute to our dear Emma here." David turned slowly, deliberately, to face his father-in-law, his eyes, no longer warm, no longer reassuring, now like chips of glacial ice. "Fun, Robert?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet, dangerously calm. "Is that what you call it? Publicly, systematically humiliating your own daughter, my wife, the mother of your grandchildren, in front of her children, in front of all your assembled guests? On her birthday? Because, Robert, I call it something else entirely. Something far less amusing." Just then, as if summoned by some invisible cosmic stage manager. Mr. Charles Harrison, a well-known, highly respected local philanthropist, a successful business magnate, and a man my parents had been desperately, almost pathetically, trying to impress, to cultivate, all afternoon, detached himself from a nearby group and approached David, his own hand outstretched, a broad, genuine smile lighting up his distinguished features. David Miller, my dear fellow. Mr. Harrison exclaimed, his voice warm, enthusiastic. I had absolutely no idea you'd be here today. What a wonderful, unexpected surprise. It's absolutely delightful to see you. I just heard, through the international grapevine, about the successful, and I must say, brilliantly executed, closure on that rather complex European tech park acquisition your firm just finalized. An absolutely brilliant, visionary move. David, we simply must talk next week. My people will call your people. Lunch? Perhaps? My treat. Of course. My parents, Robert and Susan, my brother, Mark, and my sister-in-law. Karen just stared, utterly, completely dumbfounded. Their jaws, quite literally, had dropped. David. Their David, the quiet, unassuming, slightly oddball David, knew the Mr. Charles Harrison, personally, and Mr. Harrison was not only greeting him like an old, valued friend, but was also congratulating him on some massive, international, European tech park acquisition. An acquisition that clearly involved significant sums of money, significant global influence. I could almost see the rusty, long unused gears grinding, whirring, almost smoking in their bewildered, rapidly recalculating heads. David, the quiet, seemingly unambitious husband they had always so casually, so consistently dismissed, was apparently a player, a mover and a shaker. Someone important people knew, respected, and actively sought out. The world, their carefully constructed, rigidly hierarchical, and entirely self-serving world, was in that single, stunning moment, tilting, irrevocably, on its axis. The atmosphere at the Johnson family annual summer barbecue underwent an immediate, almost comical, and deeply, profoundly satisfying sea change. My mother, Susan, suddenly, almost magically, transformed from a critical, dismissive matriarch into a fawning, solicitous, almost obsequious hostess. She rushed towards David, her face wreathed in a new, unfamiliar, and entirely unconvincing expression of warm, maternal concern, offering him the choicest cuts of the now slightly charred barbecue chicken, her voice dripping with a newfound, almost syrupy sweetness that set my teeth on edge. "Oh, David, dear," she cooed, her hand fluttering nervously at his arm. "You must be absolutely exhausted after your long, important trip. Can I get you a drink? Some of Robert's special, imported German beer in, perhaps? Or would you prefer a nice, chilled glass of Chardonnay?" Mark, my brother, the self-proclaimed roast master, the king of cruel comedy, looked utterly deflated, suddenly small, insignificant, almost pathetic. His earlier smug, arrogant bluster had completely vanished, replaced by a look of bewildered, almost childlike confusion. Karen, his wife, was staring at David with a strange, almost unnerving mixture of awe, disbelief, and a dawning, horrified, almost frantic calculation. I could practically see the dollar signs, the potential social advantages, clicking away behind her narrowed, assessing eyes. Even the other guests, the ones who had, just moments before, been politely, pointedly ignoring me, or worse, offering me those weak, pitying, complicit smiles, now suddenly approached me with a newfound, almost breathless interest. Their questions about David's fascinating work, his impressive international connections, his no doubt incredibly demanding schedule, were suddenly, miraculously abundant, almost fawning. Emma Johnson. For the very first time in my entire life at a Johnson family gathering, felt seen. Not for myself, perhaps. Not for my own quiet talents, my own modest achievements, but as the wife, the appendage of someone they now belatedly, grudgingly, perceived as important, as powerful, as one of them. It was a bitter, ironic, and deeply, profoundly unsatisfying kind of validation. But it was, I had to admit, a start. Later that afternoon, as the party was beginning to wind down, as the last of the bewildered, gossiping guests began to make their excuses and depart, David, who had maintained a polite but coolly, almost glacially distant demeanor towards my parents and brother throughout the remainder of the awkward festivities, drew Robert, Susan, and Mark aside to a quiet, relatively secluded corner of the sprawling patio. I stood beside him, my hand held firmly, reassuringly in his. "Robert, Susan, Mark," David began, his voice low, calm, but with an unmistakable, unyielding undercurrent of pure, unadulterated steel. "I need to be very, very clear with all of you. What I witnessed here today, the way you collectively, publicly, and I must say, rather cruelly, treated Emma, my wife, your daughter, your sister, the mother of your grandchildren and nieces and nephews, on her birthday, in front of her children, in front of all your assembled guests, was not just unkind. It was not just thoughtless. It was malicious. It was demeaning. And it was, quite frankly, utterly, unforgivably unacceptable." He paused, letting his words, and their undeniable weight, sink in. "For years," he continued, his gaze sweeping slowly, deliberately, over their now pale, suddenly apprehensive faces, "I have, for the most part, stayed silent. I have respected Emma's oft-stated, though I believe deeply misguided, desire to try and maintain some semblance of a connection with her family, however dysfunctional, however painful that connection might be. But that silence, I assure you, ends today. This pattern of disrespect, of casual cruelty, of public humiliation thinly disguised as harmless family fun, will stop. Now, permanently. My father, Robert, ever the blusterer, ever the one to deny, to deflect, to minimize, started to sputter. Now, see here, David, my boy," he began, his voice attempting a jovial, man-to-man camaraderie that fell disastrously, comically flat. "I really think you're blowing this all out of proportion. It was just a bit of harmless family teasing, a little birthday roast. Emma knows we don't mean any real harm by it. She's always been a bit sensitive. You know." David cut him off, his voice like ice. "Harm, Robert?" he said, his eyes narrowing. "Do you have any genuine, actual idea of the profound, cumulative harm your constant, casual dismissal, your relentless undermining, your utter lack of support or validation has done to Emma, to her spirit, to her self-worth, over the course of her entire life? Or do you perhaps not even know your own daughter, Robert? Do you have any concept, any inkling at all of who she truly is, what she's capable of, what she has, in fact, already achieved, entirely without your help, entirely despite your constant, corrosive negativity?" He turned to me then, his eyes softening, filled with a fierce, protective love that made my heart ache with gratitude. "Emma, my love," he said gently, "I believe you have some rather significant and professional news you were perhaps waiting for the right, or rather, a less hostile moment to share with your family, about your recent, and I must say, rather spectacular, Artistic pursuits? I took a deep, steadying breath. This was it, the moment of truth, the moment of reckoning. Actually, yes, I said. My voice clear now, surprisingly steady, imbued with a newfound, quiet confidence I hadn't realized I possessed. My impractical freelance writing and illustration work? The work you've all so consistently, so gleefully, ridiculed for years? Well, last month, I signed a 3-book deal with Penguin Random House, one of the largest, most respected publishing houses in the world, for a series of children's graphic novels I've been developing, The Advance Alone. I paused, then named a figure, a substantial, almost breathtaking 6-figure sum that I knew would make their eyes water. A sum that was clearly, demonstrably, far beyond anything they had ever remotely conceived of me achieving. And my so-called bohemian lifestyle, the one you've all found so amusing, so worthy of contempt? I continued, my voice gaining strength, gaining power. The reason David was in Zurich this past week was not just for his own company's incredibly successful acquisition, though that, of course, was a significant part of it. He was also, as my literary agent and now my international business manager, finalizing the highly lucrative sale of the international publishing and animation rights for my book series to a major European media conglomerate. It seems, I added, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips as I looked directly at a now utterly dumbfounded Mark. That my failed artistic dreams, as you so eloquently, so publicly put it earlier, Mark, are, in fact, about to become a rather substantial, and I suspect, rather profitable, global creative enterprise. David then stepped forward, his arm slipping protectively, possessively, around my waist. Furthermore, he added, his voice calm, authoritative, his gaze sweeping over their stunned, disbelieving faces. What you also may not realize, Robert and Susan, is that Emma's unique creative consultancy, her brilliant design insights, her unparalleled understanding of narrative and user experience have been absolutely instrumental, critically so, in the complete rebranding and the successful user interface design for my own company's new flagship software platform. The very same platform, I might add, that just successfully secured that multi-million-dollar European contract Mr. Harrison was so kindly, so publicly, congratulating me on earlier this afternoon. Her artistic pursuits, as you so contemptuously, so consistently call them, Robert, are, in fact, a significant and increasingly vital driver of my company's current success, our international reputation, and our projected future growth. She's not just my wife, though she is, most wonderfully, that she is also, without a shadow of a doubt, my most valued, my most trusted, and frankly, my most brilliant, creative, and strategic partner. He paused, then delivered the final, devastating blow. In fact, he said, his voice dropping slightly, taking on a new, almost dangerous edge. She owns a rather significant 40% share of my company. We are, in every sense of the word, partners. So, David concluded, his voice like ice now, hard, cold, and utterly uncompromising. The next time any of you... His gaze lingered for a long, pointed moment on Mark, then on my parents. Feel the uncontrollable urge to roast my wife, to demean her extraordinary talents, to question her intelligent choices, to ridicule her passions. I want you to remember, very, very carefully, exactly who and what you are talking about, and I want you to understand, unequivocally, that any disrespect, any unkindness, any further humiliation shown to Emma is disrespect, unkindness, and humiliation shown directly to me, and it will, I assure you, have consequences, significant consequences, for our relationship for any future family gatherings, and perhaps, he added, his gaze lingering for a long, pointed moment on my father's now ashen, almost gray face. For certain, shall we say, financial interdependencies and potential future considerations that you may, in your complacency, have unwisely and rather short-sightedly taken for granted. The unspoken, but clearly understood, implication of past, quiet financial help David might have discreetly provided to my perpetually financially strapped parents, or future help they might, in their arrogance, have been angling for, hung heavy, almost suffocating in the suddenly very still air. Robert, Susan, Mark, and Karen were, for once in their collective, garrulous lives, utterly, completely, gloriously speechless. Their jaws, quite literally, were hanging open. The carefully constructed, rigidly hierarchical world of their Johnson family dynamic, their deeply ingrained, almost religiously held assumptions about my perceived insignificance, my lesser status, my, and by extension, David's, supposed place within it, had, in the space of a few short, devastating minutes, been not just challenged, but utterly, irrevocably, dynamited. I saw not just shock, not just disbelief, on their pale, stunned faces. I saw something else, something new, something I had never ever seen there before when they looked at me. A dawning, horrified, almost grudging respect, and unmistakably fear. David took my hand again, his touch warm, firm, grounding. "We'll be leaving now," he said quietly, his voice calm, authoritative. "Happy birthday again, my love." He then gently, purposefully, led me and our two now wide-eyed, silent children towards his sleek, powerful, and suddenly incredibly symbolic car, leaving my entire extended Johnson family standing, frozen, on their pristine, manicured patio, amidst the rapidly cooling, rapidly congealing remnants of their ruined, disastrous summer barbecue, in a stunned, chastened, and for the first time in my memory, entirely silent, tableau. The power dynamic in the Johnson family had not just shifted that day. It had been fundamentally, irrevocably, and I had to admit, rather gloriously, rewritten. The drive home was quiet, but it was a comfortable, peaceful, almost serene silence. The children, sensing the profound, unspoken shift in the emotional atmosphere, were unusually calm, almost contemplative. I felt a deep, profound sense of relief, of quiet, almost tearful vindication, of finally, truly, being seen, being valued, being fiercely, wonderfully, protected. In the days, and then weeks, that followed, there were a few hesitant, almost painfully awkward phone calls from my mother. They were filled with an uncharacteristic, almost comical deference, and a series of clumsy, indirect, and entirely inadequate attempts at apology. Mark and Karen, predictably, remained conspicuously, blessedly silent. The Johnson family dynamic, as I had known it, as I had endured it for 32 long, often painful years, was forever altered. The cruel, public roasts stopped. The casual, unthinking dismissals ceased. There was a new, wary, almost fearful respect in their interactions with me, and particularly, almost reverently, with David. My book series, when it was finally published, became an unexpected, almost runaway bestseller. I was celebrated, much to my own quiet surprise, for my talent, my unique voice, my quirky, imaginative illustrations. David and I, as true partners in life, and now, in many unexpected, delightful ways, in our creative and business endeavors, continued to thrive, our relationship built, as it always had been, on a foundation of deep, abiding love, unwavering mutual respect, and steadfast, unconditional support. I realized, with a clarity that was both painful and liberating, that my family's laughter, their ridicule, their relentless efforts to diminish me, had never truly been about me at all. It had been about them, about their own insecurities, their own narrowness, their own fear of anything or anyone. That was different. That didn't conform to their rigid, outdated expectations. David's dramatic appearance, his unexpected revelation of our shared success, hadn't magically changed who I was, what I was capable of. It had simply, brutally and irrevocably, forced them to finally, belatedly, see the person, the woman, the artist, the partner who had been there, quietly, patiently, resiliently, all along. The person they had, for so many wasted years, chosen, with such casual, unthinking cruelty, to ignore, to belittle, to try and break. My family had laughed at me, publicly, humiliatingly, in front of guests, on my birthday, a ritual of casual cruelty, of systematic diminishment. I had endured for far too many years. They had always seen me as the artistic failure, the sensitive one, the lesser, different child. But when my husband, David, the quiet, unassuming man they had always so easily, so contemptuously dismissed as too quiet, not ambitious enough, finally appeared, when the truth of our shared life, our shared success, was finally, undeniably laid bare. Everything changed, instantly, irrevocably. It wasn't just his unexpected, undeniable status, his quiet, confident power, that silenced them, that shattered their smug, complacent world. It was the undeniable, irrefutable truth of my own quiet, hard-won success, a success they had never bothered to see, never wanted to acknowledge, perhaps never even believed possible. That day, on that sun-drenched, suddenly silent patio, the cruel, mocking laughter finally died, and a new, long overdue, and I hoped, lasting respect was, however painfully, however reluctantly, born. Sometimes, I realized, the greatest, most profound shift doesn't come from the strength of your own long-ignored voice. Sometimes, it comes from someone else, someone unexpected, finally, unequivocally, making them listen. It leads one to ponder the complex, often painful dynamics within families, doesn't it? When dealing with a family that consistently demeans, disrespects, or undervalues you, do you believe that true, lasting change in their behavior is more likely to be brought about by A, your own direct, consistent, assertive confrontation and the meticulous, unwavering setting of personal boundaries over a prolonged period, regardless of any external validation or intervention? B, the unexpected intervention, or the sudden, undeniable revelation of the status, success, or power of a supportive partner or a respected external ally, which then forces the family to abruptly, and perhaps reluctantly, re-evaluate their ingrained perception and treatment of you, often due to factors entirely external to your own direct efforts? Which catalyst, in your experience or observation, tends to be more immediately, and perhaps more permanently, effective in shifting such deeply entrenched, toxic family dynamics?